Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's National Conference of State Legislatures webinar, Building the 21st Century Energy Workforce. My name is Laura Shields, and I'm a Policy Associate in NCSL's Energy Program. I'll be your moderator for today. This is the second webinar in the Energy, Environment, and Transportation Fall 2020 webinar series, which we are hosting in lieu of the 2020 Legislative Summit in Indianapolis. For a complete schedule and registration details, please visit our website at www.ncsl.org. I'd like to encourage you to participate and ask questions throughout the presentation by using the chat box located on the left-hand side of your screen. To begin building some comfortability with the chat function and to learn who is on the line today, I invite you to type in the state from which you are participating now. We will hold a formal Q&A toward the end of today's session. Our webinar today is being recorded, and registrants will be able to access the recording of the webinar and presentation slides on NCSL's website after the webinar completes. We will also send out a notice once those resources are made available. You can download today's presentation slides by clicking on the Resources tab and Speaker Bios and the Speaker tab at any time during the presentation. To share their expertise on this topic today, we have Sandy Fazeli, Managing Director of Policy for the National Association of State, or NASIO, State Senator Eric Cook from Indiana, and Michael Mccarthy with the Engineers Labor Employer Cooperative. Before turning things over to our presenters, I'd like to briefly introduce the topic that we'll be discussing today. Workforce development is one of the most important issues facing a U.S. energy industry that employs 6.7 million Americans. Clean energy jobs are growing as new technologies come online, while some traditional resources are shutting down, leaving a growing number of Americans out of work. Retirements among an aging workforce also present new challenges for hiring qualified workers across the energy sector. These issues, now compounded with economy-wide job losses driven by COVID-19, are presenting new obstacles as states look to bolster their energy workforce. This webinar will explore the workforce challenges and opportunities facing the energy sector, highlighting how the coronavirus pandemic is shifting the energy jobs landscape and how policymakers can support and train skilled workers to fill these vital positions. We'll kick things off with a quick poll question, asking you all how many energy workforce-related measures were introduced by state legislatures in 2019. The options for your answers should be appearing shortly. Excellent. It looks like we have the results in. And actually, the figure is 70 measures. So I believe only one of you got that correct, and that's great. So it's actually lower than most people, which means it's, this discussion is even more important to have today. So with that, I will turn things over to our first speaker, Sandy Fazeli. Ms. Fazeli leads the NASIO Policy and Program Priorities Coordination, Workforce Development, Equity, Access and Inclusion, and State and Local Cooperation and Coordination on Energy, Climate, and Resilience Planning. She oversees NASIO's Private Sector Affiliates Program, which connects state energy policymakers, companies, and nonprofits, and helps lead the content development of NASIO's major conferences and events. Prior to joining NASIO, Ms. Fazeli worked on energy efficiency and state policy issues at the Rocky Mountain Institute, the Colorado Energy Office, and the Alliance to Save Energy. Sandy, the floor is now yours.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Laura, so much for having me. It's a pleasure to share some of what we've been working on the U.S. energy workforce, and also to be here alongside Senator Cook and Mike. So just to share a little bit about NASIO, or the National Association of State Energy Officials, we are the membership association for the state and territory energy offices, which are agencies in each state designated by the governor to oversee key energy policy planning and program activities. These officials advance a wide range of priorities, including energy reliability and resilience, energy efficiency and affordability, and clean energy to help meet the state's economic development and environmental goals. Just to drill down on why public policy is important in our energy mix and also in our workforce, there's a few stats. Approximately half of all growth in U.S. renewable electricity generation and capacity since 2000 can be attributed to state-level renewable portfolio standards. State and federal incentives and programs, which help support early deployment of clean technologies and infrastructure, have contributed to renewable energy projects now being cost competitive with traditional fossil fuel options. This isn't just applicable to technologies that are widely available. We're seeing the important role of states happening in real time with commitments by governors and legislators and others to advance clean air, electric and hydrogen vehicles, storage, offshore wind, and many other newer technologies. Over the past few decades, we've seen, too, a gradual decoupling of energy consumption from economic growth. We are eking out more economic productivity out of each unit of energy used, thanks in large part to energy efficiency policies, programs, and standards at the state level. And of course, the energy workforce is a critical bedrock in the success of these policies, programs, and commitments. And that's why NASIO is one of the 3 partners involved in the production of the U.S. Energy and Employment Report, along with the Energy Futures Initiative, which is Secretary Ernest Moniz's nonprofit, and BW Research Partnership. The U.S. Energy and Employment Report is a survey of energy sector employers designed to supplement the Bureau of Labor Statistics quarterly census of employment and wages in order to develop a more accurate accounting of energy workers in the U.S., both at the national and at the state level. In the report, we examine 5 sectors: fuels, electric power generation, transmission, distribution, and storage, energy efficiency, and motor vehicles. And we determine employment numbers, employer hiring expectations, hiring difficulty, high demand jobs and skills gaps, workforce demographics, and other key factors. You may be wondering why we can't just rely on federal data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics to understand these trends. What the creators of the U.S. Energy and Employment Report found back in 2015 when it was first being produced at the U.S. Department of Energy is that the data collection and classification methodologies being used by BLS were systematically undercounting energy employment in nearly every sector of the energy market, with the problem exacerbated, especially in newer technology areas and in energy efficiency. So just to illustrate a couple of ways that this undercounting is taking place. In BLS data, full-time contract employees at nuclear power plants are typically counted as construction workers rather than as nuclear generation workers. Second, when it comes to technologies such as wind and solar, the employment in these industries is only counted and classified by BLS when those workers are employed directly by utility companies, not by renewable energy development firms, for instance. And finally, there is no definition or category in the North American Industrial Classification System, or the NAICS codes, for jobs in energy efficiency, leaving an incomplete picture of the millions of jobs that energy efficiency contributes to the U.S. economy. So the BLS data offer a useful starting point for understanding energy jobs, but the U.S. Energy and Employment Report complements their data set by providing supplemental information directly from energy employers. And for this reason, we've been able to get more comprehensive and better information about energy sector employment. For instance, in Texas, for the year 2019, we found over 25,000 workers working in wind, which makes sense because it's the top wind producer in our country. Similarly, we found over 12,000 workers in solar. But by comparison, the numbers that BLS reports for each of these segments is about 2,700 workers for the wind industry and only 185 for solar. So we really encourage states, both policymakers and legislators and regulators, to use the U.S. Energy and Employment Report as a way to more fully understand the energy sector. So now digging into some of the data, I have a few slides here with our top lines from the report that we released earlier this year. These are mostly national figures, but I encourage you all to visit our website, usenergyjobs.org, to read about the sectors and the states that are of interest to you. So prior to the pandemic, what we found was that the U.S. energy sector was growing and it was adding jobs at a faster rate than the rest of the U.S. workforce. In 2019, U.S. energy firms employed more than 8 million workers, comprising 5.4% of the total U.S. workforce. Employment in these sectors of the economy has grown 12.4% since 2015, outpacing the economy as a whole by more than double, which grew at 6.0%. So it represents a really large segment of new job growth over the past few years. And then here are some more stats from our 2020 report, again, released early this spring and based on data collected from employers at the end of 2019. 6.8 million workers are in the energy industries covering fuels, electric power generation, transmission, distribution and storage, and energy efficiency, again, outperforming the economy as a whole. We found another 2.55 million in motor vehicles, including 266,000 in alternative fuels, such as electric vehicles, propane, and natural gas vehicles. Energy efficiency is a big contributor to job growth. It added 54,000 new jobs in the past year and over 300,000 new jobs in 4 years. And after 2 years of decline, solar jobs bounced back in the past year. So for those of you interested in clean energy employment, what we're finding in the U.S. Energy and Employment Report is that it is accounting for more than 40% of America's entire energy workforce and over 2% of the nation's overall employment. So it's a big deal and it's growing. The report also finds a few key considerations and challenges that might be of interest to policymakers. Surveyed employers predicted continued growth in their workforce in 2020. Again, this was pre-COVID, so it remains to be seen what the overall impacts are for 2020. Overall hiring difficulty continued to rise, with employers citing lack of experience, training, or technical skills as the key reason why they are experiencing hiring difficulty. They also frequently cited the need for technical training and certification programs, really highlighting the need for expanded investments in workforce training and better coordination between employers and the workforce training system. Women represent a smaller portion of the energy workforce compared to the overall economy. And the construction workforce is closely linked to the U.S. energy sector. Of the 7.1 million construction jobs in the U.S., about 26% are directly supported by energy firms. And on the flip side, construction firms employ many workers that work on energy projects and infrastructure. What does this mean for a 21st century energy workforce? I think what it means is that changing resources mean a changing workforce. We've noticed two noticeable shifts occurring in generation sources. First is that natural gas has displaced coal as the largest net power generator. In 2019, almost 8,000 jobs were lost in coal-fired generation, while over 9,100 jobs were added in natural gas generation. Within renewables, wind is displacing hydropower. In 2019, almost 11,000 new jobs were created in renewable energy technologies. And of course, these shifts in power generation are not taking place in a vacuum. They're also having impacts on transmission, distribution, and storage. That sector has experienced significant growth, over 150,000 new jobs since 2015, driven in large part by state grid modernization, smart grid, and storage policies. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, economic growth has become increasingly decoupled from energy use. By our estimates, 30 states have energy efficiency standards or voluntary policies, and 75% of all utilities operate energy efficiency programs. One result has been the development of a segment of the workforce that supports the installation, manufacture, design, distribution, and other services related to energy efficiency. And just to illustrate really how this is changing our workforce, we can look more closely at the construction industry. 1.3 million energy efficiency workers are in the construction industry, and 78% of those workers report spending the majority of their time on energy efficiency related work. And that number has been going up over the past several years. Of course, front and center for everyone right now is the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. Energy efficiency workers have lost their jobs after being shut out of homes and buildings. Solar and wind turbine companies are furloughing workers after panels and parts get stranded and shut down factories. Factory workers are being let go because of the economic recession. The impacts have been pretty enormous, wiping out years worth of growth in the energy sector. As of August 2020, we were finding that over 1 million energy workers were jobless. And additionally, the pandemic is exacerbating systemic inequities in access and representation that already existed. So this is disproportionately affecting minorities, women, Indigenous people, and underserved communities, and also leaving a large talent pool untapped. But I think the silver lining here is that COVID is not the end of the clean energy story. It's also emerging as an opportunity to adjust course and recalibrate, and to really use energy investments as a tool in the recovery process, because they support economic development, cost savings, and support environmental goals. So for instance, in New York, in response to the pandemic, the State Energy Office has adjusted the terms of its financing programs to better serve environmental justice communities and LMI households in accessing energy efficiency, water efficiency, and solar upgrades. And we're finding that the contractors are really appreciating that change, especially during a pandemic. So some real questions, I think, for NCSL's audience is, how can we make sure that these investments happen effectively? Who's benefiting from them? And how can we bring the workforce and economic benefits to the communities where they are most needed? I'll end just by highlighting a few states that have really begun examining workforce data in their state and looking at what opportunities and the implications for their policies and programs. Minnesota, Massachusetts, Vermont, Rhode Island, Florida, New York, and Pennsylvania all have energy and employment reports that are available online that you can check out. There are also a number of state energy offices that are advancing training and workforce development opportunities, not only in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, but really just to seize the opportunity in economic development and job growth that is offered by energy investments. And I'm happy to go into more detail on those in the Q&A, but for now I'll turn it back to Laura, and thank you all for the time.
Thank you so much, Sandy, for providing an incredibly informative overview of some of the areas of growth and challenges in the energy sector workforce. Next, we have State Senator Eric Cook from Indiana. Senator Cook was elected to the Indiana House of Representatives in 2002, where he served until being elected to the Indiana State Senate in 2016. He currently serves as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee and as a member of the Corrections and Criminal Law, Commerce and Technology, and Utilities Committees. A nationally recognized leader in energy policy, Senator Cook also serves as chairman of NCSL's Energy Supply Task Force. In addition to serving in the Indiana Senate, Senator Cook leads a private law practice, Cook and Mccarthy PC. Senator, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is now yours.
Well, thank you, Laura. It's a pleasure to be with you, and thanks to NCSL for organizing this most timely program. It's a pleasure to be with my distinguished co-panelists as we learn from each other. And one thing that I hoped to bring to today's discussion was my own experience, having worked in utility policy in Indiana for nearly 18 years across energy, gas, water, telecommunications. I was consistently hearing from utilities, large and small, rural and urban, across our state about the workforce shortage. and how the workforce is aging out, but the number of new trained workers coming in was not sufficient to meet not only future demand, but as well as current demand. This was puzzling to me because these tend to be high-wage jobs with good benefits, head of household breadwinner jobs. And so I set out last year, pre-COVID, to try to figure out why. And I decided to sort of walk backwards and look at our CTE, our career and technical education programs going on to see whether or not they were aligned with workforce needs. So for the first time, a utility guy in the legislature took a dive into the education sector. I learned that typically CTE classes are organized to fall within one of 16 national career clusters. A career cluster is a group of jobs and industries that are related by skills or products. And then within each cluster, there are what are known as cluster pathways that correspond to a collection of courses and training opportunities to prepare students for a chosen career. These 16 career clusters were established at the national level by the state's Career Clusters Initiative and are recognizable across the United States in middle schools, high schools, community and technical colleges, and the workforce. So, what are these 16 career clusters? You can see from this slide, and I'll review them briefly. There's agriculture, food and natural resources, architecture and construction, arts, AV, technology and communications, business management and administration, education and training, finance, government and public administration, health science, hospitality and tourism, human services, information technology, law, public safety, corrections and security, manufacturing, marketing, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, known as STEM, and finally transportation, distribution, and logistics. Within each of these 16 career clusters exist 79 career pathways. And it didn't take me long to realize that what we consider the utility industries really don't exist as either a career pathway or as one of these 16 career clusters. So just as the previous presenter spoke of a misclassification of energy jobs, what I found was essentially a misalignment of our national career clusters, which can be and are usually adapted by the states. And when I looked at Indiana's version of the career clusters, they were just as misaligned. And this misalignment, I wondered whether it contributed to the utility workforce shortage. In other words, it appeared to me that our system of career clusters and the pathways that exist within those clusters were not aligned to direct and encourage interested students in the field of utilities. So to remedy that, I introduced what was Senate Bill 195 in the 2020 session of the Indiana General Assembly, which would require our State Board of Education to approve, for purposes of career and technical education graduation pathways, a career and technical education cluster that would allow Indiana students to acquire knowledge and skills related to employment in the electric, natural gas, communications, water, and wastewater utilities industries. In our state, the governor's workforce cabinet consults with our state board, and so the bill further required the governor's workforce cabinet in consultation with the state board and our Commission for Higher Education, then to create course sequences for this new career and technical education structure. The bill itself is very simple, appears on the current slide. We define utility career cluster as a list compiled for purposes of college and career pathways relating to career and technical education, and setting forth the industries and occupational fields that are related to the provision of utility service and share similar knowledge and skill training requirements. The bill defines utility services as the production, transmission, or distribution of electricity, acquisition, transportation, distribution, or storage of natural gas, provision of communication services, treatment, storage, or distribution of water, and collection or treatment of wastewater. So for legislators who are interested in helping their state build a utility workforce, not just for today, but also for tomorrow, the key takeaway, based upon my experience, is to first understand, take a look at and understand the structure of your state's CTE system. And if your state is currently operating by default on the National Career Cluster model, then as you saw in the earlier slide, really the absence of a career pathway toward the utility industry. So the legislators should first, again, take a look at what their own state's CTE system has looked like. A few states, California is an example, who have designed very well their own energy career cluster. But to do that, you got to take a step outside of the national default model. And then a bill like Indiana Senate Bill 195 would serve as a template for bringing to the forefront of your state's CTE system a career cluster and the associated pathways that would make students aware at a very early age of those opportunities that exist in the career of energy and other utilities. But it will take someone to step up, make that inquiry, and if necessary, file that legislation in order to move your state in that direction. I will tell you, we did encounter some pushback. There is sort of an institutional reluctance to keep legislatures out of essentially what are viewed as curriculum-related decisions. And so as the bill went forward, we had to navigate around that. But the good news was that started the dialogue with our state's CTE structure to begin this change here in Indiana. So with that, I hope that our experience here in Indiana is useful to anyone in the other 49 states who hopes to do something positive toward building a 21st century energy workforce. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks so much, Senator Cook, for providing a detailed analysis of this recent legislation designed to increase energy workforce, educational, and job training opportunities in Indiana. Our final presenter for the day is Michael Mccarthy. Mr. Mccarthy leads external affairs and communications on behalf of the more than 7,600 hardworking men and women of the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 825, as well as the nearly 1,000 signatory union contractors who employ them. Prior to his role with ELEC 825, Michael was the Senior Director of Public Affairs at MWWPR, one of the largest privately owned public relations companies in the Americas, where he represented a wide portfolio of corporate interests and worked with labor organizations. A veteran political operative, Mr. Mccarthy has served as a consultant and advisor on races for the United States Senate, Congress, State Senate, Assembly, and dozens of local offices. Michael, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you to the entire NCSL team for your efforts in putting this together and rethinking what the conference looks like in a digital space. And thank you to everybody for the opportunity this afternoon. As Laura mentioned, I have the privilege of representing 7,600 hardworking men and women, as well as the 1,000 signatory contractors who put them to work. So at ELEC, we are the labor management fund for the operating engineers, and we see ourselves as kind of the nexus between the rank and file workforce, but as well as the employers who put them to work. So we are in an interesting position to identify the needs of our workforce in the future. So while many are familiar with operating engineer members, are folks that operate the cranes that build your high rises, construct your supply chain logistics warehouses, move dirt, pave roads, fix bridges. What often gets overlooked on occasion is that these same men and women are the folks building our critical energy infrastructure, your pipelines, your electrical grid, and even your renewable energy generation. So when we speak to policymakers about energy policy, we see ourselves as honest brokers. Whether it's traditional or renewable energy sources, my men and women build it all across the board. So when we approach this issue, we look at it from a place of what's best for the economy, what's going to employ our workforce, and what's going to help the state that we're in both the short and the long term. So we're fortunate to have a business manager locally, as well as a general president nationally, who embraces change while others could shy away from it. We decide to lead into it. So operating engineers took a multifaceted approach to prepare our folks for the 21st century energy workforce. In the early 1900s, operating engineers went from the steam engine to hydraulic, and now we're in a place where we're looking at what role do we play in the automated world when equipment's going to be run by AI. And now in the energy space, that's from the transition from oil to coal to natural gas, and then from offshore drilling to what offshore wind is going to look like. So we took an assessment of national energy needs. What keeps the lights on? What's going to keep our smartphones charged, keep our homes cool in the summer, and keep our homes warm in the winter? From there, we put a plan in place to train our folks to be ready for the next generation. And for us, in operating engineer world, when we put training in place, that requires a lot of space and a lot of equipment. So we operate two locations in New Jersey and then an international location in Crosby, Texas. They became the go-to training platforms for our operators doing offshore drilling. Now, obviously, looking at what the next world looks like, we noticed that the same platforms our folks in the seas we're working on are going to be the same platforms when they install offshore wind turbines. So we were fortunate to be able to start training our members to be ready for what that next generation looks like. Now, we in New Jersey, our training center is the nationally renowned pipeline safety location. Our folks that are doing your water mains, your gas pipelines, your oil pipelines, if they're operating engineers, they probably come through my training center in New Jersey for their safety course. Now, when it comes to energy future, the challenge that we face in the labor movement is not a skills gap, but it's a credentialing gap. Our men and women are able to do this work, but as we move to the future, it becomes making sure they have the proper credentials, and then that also became the concept of what does the future operating engineer look like. It's not necessarily going to be the guy or gal riding the bulldozer, because most of your equipment now is operated by AI. So those of you that have young kids or those of you yourselves who play games on your iPads, that's what the future of operating engineer work looks like. And this is a shot from one of our training centers where our apprentices are doing their work on simulators. So as I mentioned, we decided that we needed to undergo and address the problem of credentialing. We in New Jersey decided to delve into this head on. So we embarked on the process of turning our training center into a nationally accredited technical college. So we'll actually be the first in the nation to have a union training center that can issue associate's degrees. Now, we've already received our approval from the federal government, but because of factors outside of our control, we have not been able to start issuing degrees because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But we are hoping that we should be able to do that. So our members not only will receive, a union book, great benefits, the skills to have a wonderful career and build a middle-class life, but they'll also now walk away from our training centers with an associate's degree in construction management. Now, to take that to the next step, as I mentioned, the operating engineers of tomorrow, we're already in discussions with additional higher education institutions, both on the community college level as well as the Ivy level, to start incorporating computer science and robotics curriculum into our accredited technical college. So I'll just flip through a couple of fun photos for everybody of some of our folks working in some of our training sectors. So as a result of our efforts, we in New Jersey now have the first in the nation accredited technical college for a union. And some of our sister locals are in the process of trying to do the same. When we had this conversation on a global perspective within the operating engineer world, it became, how do we prepare ourselves for what the future of energy policy brings, regardless of what comes out of our state legislatures or our federal government. So we like to take the approach that we want our folks ready on day one. And that's just not the skills, but that's the safety protocols and all the safety procedures in place. And then we're happy to entertain any questions of kind of how we went through that process, if anybody has. So thank you, Laura.
Thanks so much, Michael, for providing your insights on what is happening on the ground in this evolving energy workforce. I'd now like to shift gears to the final portion of today's webinar, question and answer. We'll answer as many questions as we can until the top of the hour. I'd like to remind those participating, if they have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the audience chat now, or you can follow up with our presenters afterward via email with any questions you may have. So to start off, I'll pose this first question to our presenters. You've all touched on this in various ways in your presentations. What are the biggest challenges that you've observed when considering or implementing policies that prepare a workforce in an energy sector that is constantly evolving and innovating?
Well, this is Eric. I'll kick us off, and I mentioned it during my presentation that we were bringing change. And we encountered just a little bit of the institutional pushback about setting a precedent of the legislature getting involved in setting curriculum and education standards in general. And so even though as our bill went through the committees, every single utility sector testified about shortages, testified about the well-paying jobs with good benefits, testifying about the opportunities, we still had to overcome the resistance, to the legislature pushing reform within our CTE system. And so from our experience here in Indiana, that was something that we encountered, and as the bill made its way through the process, had to adapt to.
I can jump in on this one. This is Michael. As I mentioned, our largest challenge has always been, skills versus credentialing. So we in our regional, area have been pretty fortunate to be able to sit down with all of our local utilities, from the telecom to the electrical to the generation to the gas folks, and now as our governor is embarking on a new energy master plan, and a push for larger amounts of renewables, the companies that are winning the solicitations for offshore wind, and working with them to make sure that we are prepared, that when it comes time to put a shovel in the ground or a pile in the ocean, that our members, as we like to say, are ready on day one. So, kind of developing that curriculum, because our folks have the skills to do it. It's just making sure they have the recognized accreditations from whichever utility or organization is heading up the project.
This is Sandy. I'll just add, I think, from a more macro perspective, thinking about the development of energy policies, which could have impacts for decades, really sort of marrying that with the availability of the workforce and also building a pipeline. So, we know that we have an aging and retiring workforce in some sectors within the energy industry. How can employers and policymakers really work together to develop curricula and training and credentialing programs that bring in more talent, qualified workers, and also help sort of reap the benefits for communities that have typically not been represented in the workforce? It's a multifaceted challenge for sure.
Thank you all so much. And pivoting to the next question, and I know, Sandy, you touched on this in your presentation, how do you think COVID-19 has shifted priorities in the energy workforce and training in particular? And do you anticipate that these changes will be permanent or temporary?
I can start. This is Sandy. I think what we're seeing is sort of a new lens of the opportunity for clean energy investments to help support underemployed and unemployed workers. Just this past summer, the District of Columbia Energy Office announced a new solar photovoltaic training program that is specifically tailored for its unemployed and underemployed residents, and customized for the parts of the city that is struggling from not only from the pandemic but also from aging infrastructure and lack of opportunity and access in clean energy programs. So I think one of the silver linings of the pandemic is really sort of placing a new lens on the need for targeted investments, both in the workforce, but also in terms of just where energy investments go at the local and state level.
This is Eric. I'll jump in. One thing that we've noticed is due to COVID, many, if not most, of the administrative functions are being done remotely. And here in Indiana, in most cases, at least through the end of the year. But on the other hand, by definition, the men and women in the field, the linemen, the folks laying pipes, the folks interacting with consumers can't. And so it will be interesting to see is when we hopefully sooner rather than later return to normalcy, if this sort of separation continues between the world of remote work and the world that can't be done remotely, and how close back to normalcy we actually come.
It's Mike too. I'll round that one out with kind of twofold of what we've seen up in the Northeast. And coming from New Jersey, which is one of the densest states in the country, when we went into our shelter in place, after about the first 2 weeks and our contractors and our men and women figuring out what the new world of safety protocols in order to be out doing infrastructure work was settled upon, and figuring out what kept folks the safest, we actually saw an uptick in infrastructure work. Now, part of that is regular Joe and Janes were staying home with their kids, and that allowed us in a very dense environment to go out and do significant repairs to roads, bridges. So you saw a significant uptick in your everyday infrastructure. But as you look at what COVID-19's impact is going to be, it's going to be up to the folks we're presenting to, the members of the legislatures all around the country, to look at what their post-COVID revenue looks like and figure out where the target investments in the energy sector are going to have to be. Instead of kind of approaching it from a broad-based approach, you're going to be forced to pick and choose, because you're seeing a lot of places where just overall revenues are down. So that's unfortunately the challenge for those listening to us today.
And if I may add another angle, I think the two previous points were spot on. We're also seeing a change in the models for energy efficiency, particularly in the built environment, and some of them really are antithetical to, previous notions of what energy efficiency means in a COVID world, right? Fresh air intake isn't always synonymous with an efficient building, but is becoming more and more important as people are experiencing, this public health threat. ASHRAE has released new standards sort of in lockstep with the changing information about the coronavirus pandemic, and that they're actually providing that free of charge. And I think that will have impacts in terms of the skill set that's needed for construction workers and energy efficiency technology installers and designers in terms of actually, operating and building buildings in a new COVID world.
And I know one of the things we're interested in seeing in New Jersey is, hopefully as the world starts to normalize, looking at what peak demand and usage of the grid looked like while commercial usage was down, but residential was up. We're interested to see kind of how that's going to play on what the total amount of megawatts are going to be needed in order to focus where investment should be. So I'm interested to see if some of the utility companies going forward are going to be able to kind of provide that data.
Thank you all. Yeah, and it definitely seems like some of these changes may be lasting and permanent, and then others could, just meet the moment in a sense. And we did get some questions in through the audience chat, so I'll go ahead and read one for you now. This one is, what is the role of energy districts in creating demand for distributed energy investments? I'm not sure if any of you have any perspective on that.
Could the inquirer specify whether they mean like district energy technologies or like local districts?
Sure, I will get that follow up. And in the meantime, I will go ahead and pivot to a different question. This one is, are there reputable organizations now offering training programs in renewable energy efficiency and energy storage for construction firms and labor unions, in addition to the programs that, Michael, that you highlighted?
Yeah, this is Sandy. I can jump in on that. We had the opportunity a couple of years ago to conduct a workforce assessment for the city of Minneapolis, which was, sort of examining what the workforce training opportunities are for clean energy within the Twin Cities and sort of broader county level. And we found a lot of really interesting examples, and depending on where you're located, we might be able to help connect you. But, in the Twin Cities area specifically, there was an electrical union that is providing specific opportunities for electrical workers in renewable energy and electric vehicle technologies. There's also an initiative to create an energy efficiency training program specifically in an underserved area of the city of Minneapolis. Many of the community colleges and vocational schools also provide specific curricula in energy efficiency, renewables, and alternative fuels as well. So I think once you start looking sort of within the community college arena, within the various labor unions too, you can find really great pockets of activity and interest in clean energy training opportunities.
Thanks so much, Sandy. And Representative Eisenhower, I think we're going to have our panelists follow up with you separately, just when they've had a couple more moments to kind of digest and take in that question.
Well, I can jump in on it real quick if that's okay. What I think Representative Eisenhower is referring to, and if I'm wrong on this, Chuck, please tell me. But we tend to refer to them in our area as microgrids. That's kind of our colloquial term. And we have a number of universities that, in New Jersey that have embarked on that. Princeton University is probably one of the more famous ones. So during Superstorm Sandy, when most of New Jersey was knocked out, Princeton's microgrid was able to keep their power on. They have a small natural gas generator plus I think 25 acres of solar plus some kind of state-of-the-art storage that they're able to bounce back and forth through. I know Montclair State University in New Jersey is looking into installing their own, as well as New Jersey Transit, which is our major railway system, is in the process of utilizing a federal energy grant to put in a natural gas backup plant as a result of the power outages from Superstorm Sandy. It's also going to include a regional microgrid to ensure that they don't have the types of outages that they did, back in 2012 when the rail yards, were flooded and they couldn't get electrical distribution to move the rail trains out. So if I'm off on that, please let me know. But I think that's my understanding, I think, of what you were looking for.
Thanks so much, Mike. And it looks like we have time for one more question. So I will round things out with this one. How can state legislators and staff work with other policymakers, such as regulators, state energy office staff, as well as industry, to support workforce development in the energy sector?
I mean, I can start on this one. Oh, no, go ahead, Senator, you first.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I know from our perspective, most of it's education. I mean, we love to show off our training facilities. If nobody gleaned that from my presentation, we think that some of the things that our guys and gals are doing, are what's going to help drive, the next generation of workforce. And, oftentimes when we have state legislators come to visit, they walk away not realizing all of the different types of infrastructure or the different types of capabilities that our singular trade has. So, I would implore those to, pick up the phone, call the contracting associations, call the local labor unions, or the local workforce, contractors in the area, and go out and pay them a visit. You can see some of the things that they're working on, and they in the field can kind of tell you where they're seeing some gaps, and hopefully some legislation can clean that stuff up pretty quickly.
Well, and this is Eric. I would add and certainly promote our host, NCSL, as a terrific resource for state-level policy makers, and would also add the National Council for Electricity Policy, of which I serve on the executive committee. We're known as NCEP, and it's just a terrific clearinghouse for regulators, for policymakers from both the regulatory, the administrative, and the legislative sides of state government. And so NCEP has some terrific resources as well for state-level policymakers who want to do a deeper dive in this and other related issues.
And on the state energy office front, I would definitely encourage legislators to contact their state energy office for data and information about the energy workforce and what they're hearing from employers and other key stakeholders in terms of what the needs are, whether it's investment in workforce development programs or even sort of market opening and market expanding opportunities to create more demand for energy technologies. And to Representative Eisenhardt's point, he's generously shared a little more information about energy districts, and it sounds like, that type of model that is growing in Iowa is a really good focal point for highlighting what the opportunities might be in energy efficiency and renewable energy deployment at the household and business level, and really sort of spurring demand and interest in investing in energy technologies at the local level. Thank you for sharing more information.
Well, that just about takes us to our time. I wanted to thank our presenters so much for taking the time to share their insights and expertise in this area today. It looks like we have a little bit of a formatting issue on our last slide, but if folks have any questions about the presentation or any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to either Christy Hartman or myself. Thank you all for joining us today, and we hope you have a really great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.